Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Ask Octopus, where we take your interesting questions from the community and we do our best to answer them. Joining me today is Ryan. Hi, Ryan. How are you doing today?
Hey, Bob. I'm great. How are you?
Doing good. Excited for Memorial Day weekend?
Yeah, I haven't figured out what I'm doing yet, but I imagine I will be at the lake, either on the lake or biking around it at some point this weekend.
Nice. I
What?
imagine I'm going to be at some sort of barbecue.
Yeah, I was going to say weather permitting. I haven't actually checked the forecast for this weekend, so
Yeah, it's cold and rainy here this morning. Oh well. It's spring. What are you going to do?
yeah.
So my question today, I got from a customer that I was talking to, and it's a bit of a mouthful, and I'm going to walk you through the scenario a bit. But it's how can I automatically remove machines from Octopus when they are deallocated or removed from a scale set or a scale group? So this was the scenario for the customer. They use AWS's auto scaling groups for their workers. And they automatically get spun up every morning because they have to do a bunch of tasks. And then when they're done, they automatically get deallocated. The problem was is when they deallocate them, they they could have a deployment running when it just deallocates because it says, oh, all your CPU usage is much less, so I'm just going to go ahead and start removing these things because you don't need them as much. But Octopus doesn't really like when you pull the rug out from underneath it, specifically like around a worker, like it just yanks that right out. So it doesn't really like that too much.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like losing a worker during a deployment would not be a great scenario.
Exactly. And what we have is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my dashboard. So I have a couple workers set up, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kick this deployment off. And I've made the deployment run for a long time on purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this to test. And so the process itself is I have this script out here that says make script slow now. And all it does is it just runs a loop and it just sleeps for 20 seconds at a time, 900 times. So we have a little time to talk about this. So it's just sitting out there and it's just running and running and running and running. And what I have is I have a couple workers set up. So I have this testing worker and I have this testing worker 2. Well, now all the work is being done on testing worker 01. And so what I'm doing is I'm kind of simulating what would happen. And so this is running and it's sleeping. But if we looked at the raw task log, we would see it has leased that worker. Where is that? Yep, on testing worker 01.
Yeah, so that makes sense because that was the one that was available, so it pulled it.
Yep, absolutely. So if I were to go into my infrastructure now and I were to say delete testing worker 01, let's go ahead and delete this. This is what you're going to see. Do I want to delete? Yep. It says, nope, can't do that. You can't just delete the worker because it's currently being used by a deployment process. However, if you delete the worker from the VM itself, it would still show this message, and that's what the customer is seeing happen.
Oh, so it keeps you from unregistering the worker from Octopus, but it doesn't keep you from just like blowing that VM away or the compute resource.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable this second worker that I have running. So this would be an example, because typically you would have, say, a worker pool of anywhere from 1 to n number of workers, but you'd always want to have at least one worker in that worker pool. With the auto scaling groups, you would scale it up to, say, 10 workers because you need to do some sort of work. And when you remove the worker from the machine, when you remove that worker from your auto scaling group, where that's happened automatically for you, it may or may not be involved with a deployment. Now, the nice thing is that both AWS and Azure have the ability to call out to webhooks. So AWS, you can call out to a Lambda function. And then with Azure, it calls out to you can have a call out to a webhook when that happens. Now, because it can do that, what that means then is you can leverage our good friend, the API. So that's what I've done here. I've kind of written a script, which I'll include in a link in the description below. But what it's going to do, I'm going to include obviously my URL and my API key for my local URL, for my local instance. But what it's going to do is I'm going to be looking for the test worker 01. That's what I'm looking for. And I want to see if that's being used in any tasks. And if it is, then what it will do is it'll go ahead and cancel that task or cancel that deployment. Then it's going to go ahead and disable that. I don't like to delete the worker right away, mostly because there might be some behind the scenes cleanup work that might need to happen, or you might accidentally delete like the wrong thing. And then you're like, oh man, I have to go back through and try to figure out how to re-register this. So I figured disabling is probably a much safer step. And once you disable it inside in that worker pool, it won't be picked up in that worker again. But now that I've canceled the task, what I'm going to do is then I'll turn around and I'll basically retry the exact same task that I just did. And I'll try to use the exact same, everything as the exact same as I have it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to select everything because I have that process still running. We can still see that is in fact running. So let's go back to the dashboard. It is in fact running. So let's go ahead and just select everything and go ahead and hit F8. Aha, of course. I'm surprised. Okay. I'm going to open up a PowerShell module, PowerShell UI then.
No, is your PowerShell extension not working?
Apparently not. That's all right. Not a big deal. I was trying to be all fancy and use Visual Studio Code, but not that big of a deal. Same core thing. Go ahead and let's just run this script. So it's going to get a list of all the spaces. Awesome. Gotta love when that happens. So this is a VM that I'm running, and so I need to do this. This is
yeah. Oh yeah.
You should try Microsoft Edge. Hey,
did you know you should try Microsoft Edge?
Okay, let's try this again one more time. Yay!
Yay.
So it disabled that worker, found that worker, and did all that good stuff.
Cool.
So
now, is there a limit on how long AWS or Azure will wait for the webhook or the Lambda to finish? Because if you have a long-running deployment, you may not want to cancel it, but could you have it pull and wait for the deployment to finish and then disable things?
Yes, so that's an outstanding question. I don't know for Azure, but I know the reason what prompted this is because the customer is using AWS. They give you 2-minute notification before they just remove that machine completely. So they drop it on there.
So it's like they're like, here's your 2-minute warning.
Yeah, basically.
Go clean things up or cancel things.
Exactly. So you see that it made the script that was canceled, but if we go back here, we can see it was started up again. And if we go to the infrastructure page, go to listening tentacles, you'll see that testing worker 01 was disabled and testing worker 02 is still running. So, but yeah, that's a really good question on whether or not it, like how long do you have? I imagine Azure's probably in the same boat. Is if that happens, it's probably going to do something very similar where it's going to give you a set amount of time before it just nukes the whole box for you.
Yeah, and with it being a call out to a webhook, I can't imagine that they're waiting for the response or that they don't have like a timeout. They're not going to have like an indefinite timeout set on that probably.
Exactly. So hopefully this doesn't happen. Hopefully your task can run within 2 minutes. And maybe what you could do is say, hey, I found these tasks that are running. So my script isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So an idea might be, hey, I found these tasks that are running. I'm going to wait maybe 30 seconds before I try to cancel it. And then if they're still running, I'm going to go ahead and cancel them basically. It's a little bit more work, but I think you can definitely tweak this whole process to meet your needs a lot better.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't had that one come up recently or at all. I have a few customers I talk to that are using AWS and auto scaling, but I don't think they've used it with workers yet. I think it's more for VMs running web servers. Yeah,
and I imagine that's probably the case. This was the first time I heard this question. I was like, that's a really good question to have. And workers is a perfect use case to me for auto scaling groups because I need to do a whole bunch of work, like deploy to a bunch of different things in the morning. Maybe I need to build out my entire infrastructure or something like that for all my testers. Well, I need a lot of CPU, but when it's done, I don't need all that CPU anymore. So it's a nice way that you can leverage the built-in functionality of Octopus. And again, the reason I'm using that API, because it's back to your original question, Ryan, is I could have just waited for the machine policy to delete that worker because I couldn't find it anymore because I could set my machine policies to do that. if you can come in here into your machine policies, it's possible to do that. We can say behavior, automatically delete unavailable machines. So you can do that if you wanted to. The thing is that your task is still sitting out there and it's running, and it thinks it's trying to run and it's waiting, and it's just causing all kinds of heck. And then also the worker still thinks it has like a lease that's held on it, so it won't let you delete it. So it's like a whole bunch of things kind of all come together when you do that, when it scales everything down.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I was thinking with the machine policy, if you think like what I was mentioning with the auto scaling groups being like, usually you're spinning up like web servers, they're not going to be tied to deployments nearly as frequently as workers are. So it's going to be probably very rare that your auto scaling group is going to spin down your web servers while there's a deployment going, versus workers are being used in all of like many of your deployments. You may have several deployments going a day. Maybe they're being used for dev, test, and production.
Yeah.
Just like a greater chance for those to get caught up in it.
Yeah, and that makes, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, especially with, yeah, like you said, especially with workers. So just a bit of a TLDR around this. So leverage the API to cancel the tasks and restart them after you remove the machine. And again, AWS allows you to call out to a Lambda function, and then Azure allows you to send out a webhook. I'll include the links to these docs as well, so you can leverage that. I haven't had a chance to play around with GCP. I imagine if they do have some sort of similar functionality, it would be pretty much the same thing. I can't imagine they wouldn't provide that type of functionality.
Yeah, cool. That's a good question. That was a good overview, Bob.
Oh, thank you. So if you have an interesting question, go ahead and submit it to us. We have a form at the top URL. If you do have any burning support questions, something's not working, go ahead and email us at support@octopus.com. We'll do our best to help you out there, and might take your question that you submitted and answer that on one of our videos. And if you'd like to just talk to us, we have a community Slack channel that you can join us by going to that URL. Thank you, Ryan, for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you very much. You too. Bye, everybody.